Welcome on into 19 on the Clock, your Tri-State High School and College Sports podcast. I'm your host, Brad Pushkar. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Jackson McCarty. Jackson, how are we doing this fine Wednesday?
I'm doing fantastic, Brad. How about yourself?
I am doing great as well. It's an interesting time in the world of sports.
It is.
As we're about to talk about the kind of wrapping up of high school for this year, obviously classes are being let out already.
Yeah, baseball season is very quickly running out of steam. This is our last weekend of local teams competing to become state champions. So we've got 3 baseball teams remaining. This week we'll kind of focus more on instead of like looking at their opponents like we have in the past, we want to kind of tell you what their remaining teams are that they'll have to face, what got them here, and what they need to do to finish the year on top. But yes. Brad, you are dressed specifically nice today because we have a pretty cool guest that's coming on a little bit.
Yeah, on the college football, not on the college football, but college sports side of things.
Yes.
The House settlement came through on Friday, and in the 5 days since, it has been everybody scrambling to figure out what does this mean and what do we do next.
Exactly.
Whether it's from the university, it's from the NCAA itself, or it's from the athletes.
Which, not to be confused with the scrambling and panic that we've been doing prior to the settlement, because nobody understands what's happening.
Yeah, I think the really the only thing that's really said is the former players, which we talked to Chris Mackey about a few weeks ago. So if you want to listen to that episode and kind of hear about how that is changing things for those former players, but I spoke with a legal expert who is kind of breaking down. He works in the sports law side of things, has some experience with professional sports contracts and managing with that. And so he kind of gave me some insight on what he sees as how this is all shaping out and where things are changing. And so we will sit down with him, I'll sit down with him in a minute. But let's talk about state.
Yeah.
State finals.
Yes.
The semifinals and finals. So
we're going to kind of work our way from the top of the divisions down.
Yes.
And it kind of functions pretty well for us because we get to lead with a team that we haven't got to spend a lot of time on. A team that, if I can just be perfectly candid with you guys, I was not anticipating being here right now. And that is no fault of their own. They just had to play Moeller, and we're so used to Moeller being this, kind of powerhouse. We talk about them in every sport.
Yeah. So,
when Lakota West went up against Moeller and then beat Moeller to retain this spot, it gives us a pretty interesting chance to talk about a fantastic team that we really haven't gotten to put that much light on. So their remaining path, they'll play Olentangy on Friday, and then if they get through that, they'll play the winner of Springboro or Perrysburg on Saturday. And then they've beaten Middletown, Princeton, Olentangy Liberty, and Moeller, as we mentioned, so far this postseason.
Okay.
As a team, they are 24-7 with a .304 team batting average and a .210 ERA. That .210 ERA is what got them to the dance. Not to say that they don't have some great bats. They had a couple guys above 20 RBIs and some really functional dudes all throughout that lineup. But their pitching staff deserves, honestly, more time than we could afford to give them because it is just a true lineup of freaks of nature. I left a couple names off that I'll probably be kicking myself for, in a couple days.
I would say at the end of the games, you're going to be like, oh, what? I didn't even talk about that guy.
Literally.
He pitched a shutout.
Exactly. I've got 5 names on here, and that still was not – like that was still like 80% of what I needed to accomplish. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. I want to lead – okay, so my favorite stat line, I believe, is LJ Green.
Sure.
He is a senior, and worth mentioning, all 5 of the names I'm about to talk about are seniors. This is the last hurrah for this pitching rotation, and they have absolutely made the most of it to this point. LJ Green, 32.1 innings pitched, perfect 6-0 record, .86 ERA. 0.87 if you want to round up because it's technically .866, but we're not splitting hairs here. The point is, dude doesn't allow very many runs, ever. Behind him, you have Adrian Smith, who, again, a senior, 37 innings pitched, 3-3 record, 1.7 ERA, 56 strikeouts. So not too far off from that beautiful 2 strikeouts an inning, 56 to 37. We're getting closer. Tucker Wilburn, 38.1 innings pitched, 1.82 ERA. Drake Elrod, 31.1 innings pitched, 2.01 ERA. And then Keegan Campbell, from what I understand, primarily a bullpen guy, 22 innings, 5-0, 0.63 ERA, and 2 saves. Tell me, Brad, which of those arms are you supposed to – it's a rhetorical question, do not panic. But there's just no soft spot there at all.
No, because I like the Keegan line.
Yes.
I won't lie.
Yes.
Where I'm like, oh, man, get a guy that comes in consistently and just closes everything out for you. And
exactly.
What else could you ask for?
And there was one more guy that I didn't include that had one more save, but the ERA was a little higher and you kind of spread out a little bit. But
yeah, you pick and choose your statistics.
Right.
To tell your
absolutely.
story.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's, come on. We got to make it entertaining. But it's just been such an impressive run, not just through the GMC for Lakota West, but through this tournament. The names that I read off earlier, there wasn't really many to feel that great about going into, because like Olentangy Liberty, I know that they're away from us, but that is a name we hear kind of constantly, like a Moeller, going up against Olentangy proper. That's going to be a tough one. Like Moeller, again, I mentioned it. That is a powerhouse team. They continue to persevere, push past, and throw the lights out of every stadium that they go into.
Yes.
And so it's a genuinely incredible bullpen that if I was going to select a position group that I was most impressed by this year, they would be very much up there.
You're saying the Lakota West pitchers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you would be hard-pressed to find very many units that work in better, chemistry-wise and have just lights-out stats across the board.
Well, I think from a raw statistical perspective, this is the best pitching squad that you've brought up in the last, 4 or 5 weeks that we've been covering these teams.
Absolutely. And like
totally
the only shaky ground of that is like when we have a softball team, because they use they use so fewer arms. Mm-hmm. It kind of skews the data a little bit.
Sure, I'll kind of
separate.
I'm going to separate those because I also think like ERA gets weird with 7 innings versus 9 and things like that. But
right.
But yeah, I would draw it, from the baseball side, separating the softball side. I do think that's. I mean, I know you've had 2 pitchers, 3 pitchers maybe in a team's lineup type of thing that you wanted to talk about, but you've never been like, I got to talk about all 5.
So here's whenever I was doing these notes, right? I sat down and first I looked at the hitting lines because I was like, okay, a batting average as a team above 300, like it's going to be impressive, and there were a lot of impressive ones. Mm-hmm. And whenever I got down to the pitching numbers, I was just like, oh no. I literally was just like, this is like, I have to just talk about pitchers. Yeah. Because, like, this is freakish. This is, all the credit in the world, the Lakota West coaching staff and the talent that's on that roster, because the work that they've put in is visible and has gotten them to a point where they could be state champions in 4 days.
Do you look at their bats as, kind of like that in that average spot where the pitching covers any offensive mistakes?
So whenever I was kind of looking at it, from that 10,000-foot view, it looks like it is primarily a team that's going to win like 4-1 instead of like 10-5. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that they can't, produce and like they had I want to say that they had a little bit more than 10 home runs, and they were a pretty functional lineup. I don't think that the pitching is necessarily hiding the warts over there, but I do think that if they get the choice in how they want the game to be played, they want it to be low scoring. They want it to be reliant on what's happening on the mound because they have so much confidence in their guys.
Yeah, I mean, just skimming through the scores, Moeller was 3-2.
Yep.
Olentangy Liberty was 1-0. Mm-hmm. Princeton 3-1.
Right.
Middletown was 26-0.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's also the first round. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
with how our playoff system works, it gets
Little Miami 7-6 loss. They've played Perrysburg already, and it was a 10-9 victory.
Good. Okay.
So that
Perrysburg gets through past Springboro. There's a pretty good chance we see another stat line like that. Like, there are teams that are capable of cracking the code. It just doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this: looking through most of Lakota's games, it's either a 1-run difference or like 6 and more. And I mean, they played Middletown earlier in the year, and it was a double digit. Fairfield and Hamilton as well. But then, then they have a 4-3 game against Coleraine and a 13-3 game against Coleraine and things like that. So, so I do think that's interesting. And it does kind of set us – I'll mention one other score. They had an 8-7 win over the Baden Rams.
Yes.
Who is your next team?
They are.
Moving on.
They are still dancing. They're hanging out in the Division III state semifinals. Mm-hmm. So far, so they play Licking Valley Friday. And then they'll either play the winner of University School or Wapakoneta on Saturday, assuming they can get through here.
Sure.
So far, they have beat Goshen, Kenton Ridge, Monroe, and Butler in this postseason, a differential of 47-4.
Is that good?
Yeah, I would say it's decent. It's they have just had a lights out postseason. And if I was putting, hypothetical chips onto each of these teams, Baden would get the most chips for me in terms of who I believe of our remaining 3 is going to be a state champion.
Okay.
They have been just absurdly impressive on all parts. 25-6, you don't get there cheap. 350 team batting average, 1.38 team ERA. 1.38. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let that settle. 16 home runs as a unit, 26 triples. And honestly, I did go a more traditional format with how I pitched them because there are supporting pieces that function and help the team move along very well. But they are very isolated to their stars, and their stars have done a lot to get them here. Like Caleb Dreesen, he's a pitcher, 53 innings pitched, .26 ERA. Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. He has allowed 2 earned runs all year. 7 total. So, like off ERA, off errors and whatnot. 2 earned runs all season long. 55 strikeouts, 5 shutouts.
I was going to say that's the piece that's really noticeable too.
And worth mentioning, the Baden Rams have 5 shutouts as a team.
Okay. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, Dreesen is just like that.
All right.
Built different, I believe the kids say. No home runs allowed, 10 walks allowed all year. 10 walks in 53 innings. It takes him 5 innings, or 5 and some change innings, before he allows a walk.
Yeah.
It just lights out. Legitimately, I don't know how much farther you would have to look to find the best pitcher in the tri-state than Caleb Dreesen.
Okay.
That's, if I'm giving the whole Lakota West unit their love, as a collective, Caleb Dreesen off on that island. Come on, .26 ERA.
Hey.
5 shutout. If I keep reading the numbers, I'm not going to get any less excited. You know what I mean? Like every time it just continues. It blows my mind every time. It's like I'm forgetting what they are until I say them again.
Well, that Jackson is welcomed at any Baden tailgate.
I believe it. I believe it. I hope you guys have the merch or the fat heads or some kind of something to show some love. And there's a couple more guys that you need to have the merch for as well. Like Cade Bowling, he's a senior. Primarily talking about him on the batting here. 465 batting average on 86 at bats, 2 homers. 32 RBIs, 19 stolen. I know you love that. 5 triples, and then for his career, 87 RBIs. So he'll get to that 90 mark hopefully with a couple more games. And he's steadily improved year after year for Baden, evolving into the front man for their lineup. And has just been without Cade Bowling, I don't think they're here. And they're a fantastic team. They're like a truly fantastic team, but you remove that piece, and I think that they probably went out a round or 2 ago.
Okay.
So watching him, it has been, a pleasure, I would imagine, for all the Rams fans, and I hope that they get out there and enjoy it for the last couple of games that they have it. And then the guy that I would assume is going to step up and kind of serve that Bowling role next year is Chandler Taylor.
Okay.
He's a junior, 307 on 88 at-bats, 4 homers, so a little bit, I believe he's leading the team in that. 27 RBIs, 9 stolen, 6 doubles, 2 triples. So I do think that he'll get that next step up, being the guy next offseason or, next baseball season. and has a chance to be a state champion, lead from the front in that regard, teach that next wave, and kind of create a talent factory for Baden of just like next man up mentality, lead the ship.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you say Baden is in the best position to raise the trophy at the end of this all?
Yes. Of our three that we still have remaining, Baden would be the one that if you were twisting my arm and said, who is it going to be?
You only got to pick one.
Yep. I would go Baden. Okay. I would go Baden. I feel really good about him just as a whole. And then it's hard not to feel good about the Indian Hill Braves, too.
I was going to say, we've been talking about them
a
couple of weeks now. But
we have.
There's good reason.
Yeah, well, and so, like, I know that Austin Brisky got to go out there and talk to a couple of the players like Devlin Daniel, who, trust me, we'll talk about him here in just a minute. And he told me that it's a very you show up and it feels like a state title team. You get that vibe. Like they know what they're preparing for. They're not overlooking it, but they're here. They're locked in, and they know that they have the pieces to make it happen. So out in Division 4, they've beaten Schroeder, New Richmond, Brookville, and Fenwick. The New Richmond game and the Fenwick game went to extras. So they have kind of been the cardiac team, which is kind of ironic, because you were pointing out the Lakota West scores. But Indian Hill has dug deep. They were down pretty big against Fenwick. Came all the way back, pushed to extras, made it happen to stay alive. They just won't go away. And there's a certain magic in that. They play Perkins on Friday. If they get through that, they'll play the winner of Lake Catholic and Unioto, I believe. I know it's one of those like pushed in names. It's because it's Union and Sosho, maybe? I don't know. Either way, they play those two, whoever wins that on Saturday, if they get through. As a team, they are 22-8, 336 team batting average, 332 team ERA, and then Brad. You want that one?
129 steals, 4.3 per game.
Come on. It's the Brad stat. I have to give it. This is the last time for like 10 months I'll be able to give you the Brad stat for baseball. So I had to make sure.
I was like, I have a stat in every sport. What do you mean you're not going to be able to give me the Brad stat?
Yes, but the steal stat. Yeah. Well, what is your football stat? I know because it's 3-point percentage in basketball.
Oh.
We'll have to get you a Brad stat for football.
I'll have to think about. See, yeah, we'll figure that one out later.
This does not have to be a current podcast. We're focused on Indian Hill. Yeah. We can't draw away from them. All right, let's talk Devlin Daniel. One of the scariest athletes in the tri-state because he is a sophomore.
Yep.
To preface.
Let's talk about Devlin Daniel like we will for the next 2 years.
Yeah, literally. He is. I'm putting a D. Alexander Sharpie mark over his name.
Okay.
This is one that I think that I don't think we'll have fatigue because he's so good that it's hard to have fatigue. But it's one of them that they're going to be like, they're talking about Devlin Daniel again? And I'm like, yes, we are. Of course we are, because he's fantastic. 570 on 86 at-bats, 5 homers, 42 RBIs, 11 doubles, 8 triples, 19 stolen bases, again as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
Yeah, that's
like he just got his learner's permit. And he is destroying teams. That's what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. I'll never change, Jackson. Thank you.
I won't. I absolutely will not. Devlin Daniels, shout out. And he's got so many bats around him.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice how this all functioned because we had Lakota West with just crazy arms.
Yep.
We had Baden, who had a little bit of a mix of everything, the stars that you needed to know, and then Indian Hill's lineup. We've got 5 names that I do want to highlight here because
got big swingers.
Right. There's nowhere that you can feel confident as a pitcher going up against this lineup. Obviously, we talked about Devlin. Let's talk Ashton Graham. 396 on 91 at-bats, a home run, 25 RBIs, 9 doubles, 18 stolen. They are a quick team, as we talked about.
Yes.
Jimmy Leibel, 435 on 46 at-bats. Kind of, a low AB count, but has contributed significantly. 21 RBIs in 46 at-bats. He's getting an RBI like almost half of his ABs. He's got a home run. He's got 8 doubles, a triple, and 7 stolen. Brady Drost, hope I'm saying that right, another sophomore that'll be working with Devlin for the next 2 years. 333 on 66 at-bats, 18 RBIs, 8 doubles, 12 stolen. And then I'm going to butcher this name, and I very much apologize to you, Luke. Luke Agnask? Agnask?
Yeah.
Find me on Twitter and let me know how wrong I'm saying that. 364 on 55 ABs, 16 RBIs, 7 doubles, a triple, 14 stolen. It comes from everywhere.
Yes.
And again, like any one of, any collection of these guys is going to get on base, and then whoever the next one is, like, oh, perfect, I'm going to add a couple more RBIs. Mm-hmm. And it's just like clockwork. You really don't have to worry about it when they pop up to the plate. They do have some solid pitching, but I would say that if they're going to become state champions, it's off the strength of their bats.
Which I think is kind of what you've been saying all along.
Yeah.
Is that at the end of the day, it comes down to how many hits are they getting?
Yeah, it's just, are the bats running the right amount of warm, like they normally are, to push you above? But now that we're in this territory of where it is so incredibly talented teams everywhere you look, that difference is so minute. Yes. That you have to be on your best game every game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully for them, they will be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so these games are Friday and Saturday?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. All the first ones are on Friday, then the championship games are on Saturday.
Are they all being played in the same place?
No, but I do not have the locations.
Then we don't worry about it.
Okay. Listen, if your team is there, you know where the game is.
You're going to the game.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So that puts a wrap on the high school season.
It does.
Puts a wrap on high school sports for the 2024-2025 season as well.
Rad. What are you doing, dude?
We gotta have a little bit of heartbreak sometimes.
What is our what is our music budget? Can we get like some Sarah McLachlan playing or?
Andre Bocelli.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. There. Hey, be careful. Copyright.
That was 2 seconds. It's okay.
We're safe.
Also, it's covered. It's okay. It's also it's not being performed well. It's also okay.
We have so many safety procedures and barriers in effect for that.
As long as they'll start singing in Italian, we're all right too. But yes, like I said, it's the end of the sports seasons, and that means it's prime time for regulatory bodies to make sweeping decisions that change the landscape of everything, especially in college sports.
That just throw us all into such a tailspin.
Yes. And so if you haven't been following, of course, Friday, the House settlement was finalized for essentially paying college athletes, whether it be through, as most commonly referred, name, image, likeness, which is really just like being able to market yourself. Players are still not being paid for what they do on the field. It is everything that goes on around it.
Yes.
And I think that's, as I've already said, I've already sat down and talked with a legal expert about this, and so we're going to break down a little bit of what this all means for both players that are at these schools, for high schoolers that are getting ready to go to these schools, and also what it means for the universities themselves, because that's going to be a lot of changes. So let's go ahead and go to that now. So after Friday's House settlement, the landscape of college sports is going to be changing. Joining me now to kind of discuss what's next, what this all means for the NCAA and college sports, is Michael Goldman, the co-chair of KMK Law Sports and Entertainment Service Team. Mike, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So let's kind of start with just what is happening with this settlement. There's a kind of cap on how much universities are going to be able to pay players. They're going to be able to pay players more directly. It also kind of sets some rules for how players can get paid. So what in your mind, as you've been reading about this, is the biggest change legally for college sports?
Yeah, so just to take a quick step back, I think it's important to talk about the different types of marketing rights and different types of ways that athletes, particularly professional athletes, get compensated. Mm-hmm. So first we'll talk about marketing rights, and I'm going to call it marketing rights because I think the term NIL has been hijacked by college sports. Like, people hear NIL and assume it's synonymous with college sports, but in reality, NIL is short for name, image, and likeness, which ties back to a state property right called the right of publicity. And the right of publicity, as you probably know, protects and allows an individual to control the commercial use of their name, image, and likeness. So, for example, if I wanted to create a new shoe company and call the first shoe the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander ones or the signature SGA shoes, and I just started making those shoes and marketing those shoes and using SGA's name, image, likeness, face without paying him, SGA could bring a right of publicity claim against me and seek monetary damages and probably get a court to make me stop making the shoes. So this legal protection called the right of publicity allows athletes to control their name, image, and likeness. So granting consent in exchange for money, we're going to call that marketing rights. Athletes grant marketing rights in two primary contexts. The first is what we're going to call team marketing rights. And team marketing rights are a grant by the player to their team and to the league to promote the team, the league, and the sport of basketball if we're talking about an NBA player, or the sport of football if we're talking about an NFL player. And examples would be official broadcasts, ticket sales campaigns, team-branded digital content. I mean, now all tickets are digital, but back in the day when the tickets were on printed paper and there was a picture of Tom Brady or a picture of Carson Palmer, that team marketing NIL grant in their player contract gives the team and the league the right to do that. And that's distinct and separate from what I'm going to call third-party marketing rights. And third-party marketing rights are granting a license to use the player's name, image, and likeness to a brand or a company. You see this all the time. We were chuckling before we got on air that Steph Curry's Under Armour deal. That's a great example. Steph Curry granted Under Armour the consent to use his name, image, and likeness in exchange for a ton of money. And they make shoes, they make commercials, they make apparel, they make a whole host of things. So, you know, just to recap, we have team marketing rights granted to the team and the league, and third-party marketing rights granted to unaffiliated third-party sponsors and brands. Just to give a quick example of how that plays out in the NBA. So the NBA standard player contract and the collective bargaining agreement provides this comprehensive framework for how the team and the league can use a player's name, image, and likeness. So first, the player grants these rights to the NBA and the team as part of their NBA contract. Sometimes the league or a team can request them to make commercial appearances on behalf of third-party sponsors. And then the final piece of that is the collective and group licensing regime in the NBA, which allows certain people that contract with the NBA to use a large swath of players' name, image, and likeness. The best example of that is the 2K video game. Like, there's 450 NBA players, but they don't have to get 450 separate agreements with the players. They can just go and get the group rights, and with one contract, they can get the rights to all those players. So feel free to jump in. Stop me whenever.
I was just saying, and I'm glad you brought up the video game side of things, because last year was when the NCAA college football game returned, because EA Sports was able to actually work with every single player to create some kind of deal, whether it was, I believe the most basic was basically a copy of the game, like a couple $100s for taking your likeness and things like that, while some players had larger deals because of their notoriety and things like that. So with how this settlement changes things, is that going to be a more common, or not necessarily common, but is that, does that make it easier for things like that video game to continue now where they're working with a mass group, or is it still down to the teams, down to the universities, down to the conferences?
Right now, I think it's still the latter. Over time, there might potentially be introduced some type of group licensing, but as of today, I don't think there is one. Okay. And that's just kind of a good caveat to this whole conversation, is the House settlement is pretty dense, a lot of legalese and court stuff that are boring. But at the end of the day, it paints this new structure at a pretty high level and in broad strokes. Over time, and I think almost on a daily basis, I think we're going to start getting more information that really sets the granular details of what the House settlement rules will be, how the NCAA plans to enforce it, all the different caveats and granular details that are required to comply with something like this. Ready to jump into the House settlement?
Yeah, let's do it.
Gotcha. So before we do that, sorry, one quick note is we just talked about team marketing rights and third-party marketing rights. Those are distinct from what I call athletic services. So athletic services are getting paid to play basketball.
Yes.
The standard NBA contract says that the player is employed as a skilled basketball player and is required to go to practice, play in games, go to training camp, et cetera, et cetera. So really, to break it down, there's 3 big buckets of how professional athletes are getting compensated: team marketing rights, athletic services. Both of those are housed in the player contract, and then separate third-party marketing rights.
Okay.
And the general rule of thumb is that team marketing rights and compensation for athletic services count towards the salary cap. Third-party endorsement deals do not.
Okay. Whereas that is the big difference with the NCAA, is that athletic services isn't getting paid for at all.
Correct.
Does it, can I say where it's like scholarship based would still count in a way? I don't remember if they're actually dropping scholarships entirely in that sense, but
I don't think they're dropping scholarships. I think the limits are being replaced with roster limits, but
okay, yes.
My understanding is just the players would still get scholarships, but then on top of a scholarship, they might get a $300,000 check.
Yes.
So,
and that would be based on the marketing, whether
correct.
It's what the team does.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, the difference with the NCAA is that the third party does count towards that overall cap now.
No. Okay. So
go ahead.
Yes. So for the first time, schools can actually pay players, like we just mentioned.
Yes.
The starting quarterback might get a $300,000 check from his university. The nature of that payment is intended to be what I think team marketing rights. It's the player granting the name, image, and likeness license to the school to promote the school, promote the athletic department, promote the team, handful of other things. We'll talk a little bit about the school's ability to sublicense and bring in sponsors. Like, they're going to have the ability to act almost as a agent representing the athlete to facilitate third-party deals.
Yes.
We can cross that bridge down the road.
That works.
But as you mentioned, those direct payments are going to be capped, and it's called the pool cap. And the pool cap is going to be a set number. I think it's projected to be $20.5 million in year one, and it's based on a percentage of certain athletic department revenue from the Power 5 conferences. But as you mentioned, these payments, the nature of these are going to be for team marketing rights. The House settlement was almost like comically vague and didn't talk about compensation for athletic services. But if you read between the lines, read articles, and kind of know the state of affairs in college sports, you'll know that it is largely expected that direct compensation to play basketball at a school is still prohibited.
Yes.
So you can get compensation for your name, image, and likeness for the school to use directly from the school for the first time ever, but you can't get a check to play basketball.
And I think at the core of that is trying to kind of cling on to the sense of amateurism in college sports. I know that's always been the biggest argument, whether it was from the NCAA or from even some fans, where it's, I don't want to. Not saying that all fans don't want to see the players get paid, but it was a sense of, well, once they start getting paid, it's all going to just matter about money and not about the game. We want players that love the sport, things like that. I believe a lot of coaches argued that for a long time until they changed their tune because of the House settlement coming through and realizing the NCAA was kind of in a losing battle throughout the whole court casing. But where was I going with that? But yes, so it's clinging on to that amateurism. So you, as you kind of mentioned, so how are the ways? Because you said that a university could work as like an agent or broker with a third party for these athletes. My understanding has been that the athletes will have to report any deal over $600 from a third party, which I don't know how often. In my head, that's going to matter more for college basketball, college football,
For sure.
than the Olympic sports, where I know a lot of players do get some kind of deal. I see a lot of volleyball players who promote energy drinks and things like that.
Well, that's the nature of name, image, and likeness. Is each person has individual commercial value. Paige Buchers has a ton, whereas a very good men's college basketball player might not have as much as Paige. She's in the WNBA now, but it's individual based, and everyone has a fair market value, and that's going to become a huge part of the post-House settlement era. Are the rules and restrictions that govern those third-party payments. So let's break that down for a little bit. So I mentioned that there's this cap, and I mentioned that schools can pay athletes directly for their team marketing rights subject to the cap. However, the House settlement expressly permits students to keep obtaining third-party marketing rights deals. So those energy drink deals, the Gatorade deals, those types of things are going to continue. They're permitted, and importantly, they are not counted towards the cap. So let's use Arch Manning as an example. He may make $300,000 from Texas for his team marketing rights. He may have Gatorade deals, Nike deals, you name it, other brands paying him, and as long as those meet some of the restrictions that the House settlement is beginning to set forth, those presumably will be outside the cap.
Let me jump in just because we keep mentioning things like Nike or Adidas and all of the especially athletic brands and shoe brands. Does that affect anything? Because so many schools have, Oregon is a Nike school, the Nike school, but I believe Ohio State is a Nike school. Cincinnati is a Nike or an Under Armour school. If these athletes are working with that company that already has a connection to that brand, is that going to change? Does that change things, or is it?
Very good question. I think that it's going to depend on the particular deal, the particular circumstances. But you bring up an interesting point in that these third-party marketing deals, those are outside the scope of official team activities. So just because you're a Celsius energy drink, I think you mentioned, you can't be on the sideline like holding up the Celsius energy drink. Yeah. You also can't, if you're an Ohio State player, you can't do a commercial and use the Ohio State name and logo. Like, those are truly your commercial identity, your name, image, and likeness, not the schools and not team activities. And when you talk about shoe companies, a lot of those deals require exclusive use of the Under Armour shoe in official team activities. There's like exceptions for health and safety, and I did one deal where there was a 7'9" player, and we were like, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to make a shoe for this guy. So if you can't, he's allowed to get a custom shoe without breaching the exclusivity, which was an interesting one. Yeah. But it's a very good question, and I think those will be deal specific, and the universities are going to have policies, and they're going to understand their agreements, understand what they can and can't do, and likely inform the athletes of like, hey, if you do have a shoe manufacturer deal, here are your requirements when you step on the field or on the practice or in front of a camera. As part of official team activities, you can't be wearing that brand, or at least you can't have it on the they're going to have policies, and I think they already do. Okay. So you mentioned Nike. So just to recap, we have team marketing rights, we have third-party marketing rights. Yes. Schools can pay for team marketing rights. Athletes can continue to get third-party marketing right deals outside the cap. Okay. However, what about collectives? What about boosters? Yes. What about individuals that we know for a fact, or just say publicly, say that they are affiliated with this school? This is an NIL collective. We are paying athletes exclusively from this school. Mm-hmm. Well, that is probably the thing, aside from schools paying athletes directly, the restrictions on boosters and collectives is probably the largest thing that is going to change because of this House settlement. And so they define they call it an associated entity or individual. I just call it a booster or collective. Yeah. But they have a definition for what these are: entity that is known or should be known to exist for the purpose of promoting a particular school or paying a particular school's athletes. For individuals, any individual who directly or indirectly has contributed more than $50,000 over their lifetime to a school, that would be the booster. Okay. And then really interestingly, it captures at the very end of that definition, any entity owned, controlled, or operated by any of the people I just mentioned. So if you're a booster and you own a company and you want to use that company to pay the athlete, I think that deal is going to be put under the microscope and be subject to a heightened scrutiny. It's not saying you can't do it, but now in order to be outside the cap and in order to comply with presumably what the new NCAA rules are going to say, there's a whole level of analysis that goes into that. It's no longer the wild, wild west where the collective can write a $5 million check and $5 million check for a player to show up at like one commercial.
Yes.
And so for those boosters and collectives, importantly, there are two restrictions. First, the third-party marketing agreement has to have a legitimate business purpose. It actually has to be an endorsement deal. It can't be a disguised pay for play. It can't say, yeah, you get $1 million for one commercial, but you have to attend this school.
Yeah.
And two, and probably most importantly, there's going to be a fair market value analysis. And what that means is subject to a lot of interpretations. And you mentioned earlier that they're going to have to report these deals. So presumably this NIL Go entity or mechanism that's going to be operated by Deloitte is going to have a lot of data to kind of tell what's fair market value. But we also have a lot of information on professional athletes. The vast majority of professional athletes make way more money in their player contract than they do from endorsement deals. So this whole fair market value analysis is really going to be very important and really going to change these collectives.
And so I think it's interesting to me because I've been rereading a lot of old reporting about when players weren't legally paid. And so some of this dates back about 10 years, like 2014. And there was a reporter named Stephen Godfrey who specifically did some kind of I'll call it undercover work, but spoke with the bag men of SEC schools. And it was always about how, $1,000 in cash ended up in his pocket. Crazy how that happened. Or wow. There's a new TV that ended up in his room because he didn't have a TV already. Does it feel like, and it was another piece was kind of like, these guys are known by the coaches because they're just like, hey, this guy does stuff for us. Mm-hmm. And then you never see them again. And the coaches goes, I met him once, I think. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like that's going to be, is that a subset of what's going to kind of happen in this, I think, kind of gray space until more regulation gets really locked in where it's kind of just everything's under the table if you need to do something more than fits within those regulations? Yeah,
I think it depends on the NCAA's ability to enforce these regulations, which I have a quote from Charlie Baker. So the rules before this House settlement for the last 4 or 5 years in the NIL era, the rules didn't allow for a lot of the stuff that was going on. It just happened because the NCAA couldn't really enforce any of the rules.
Because they were going to end up in court, basically, if they did.
Exactly. So Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, says, Division I members crafted well-intentioned rules and systems to govern financial benefits from schools and name, image, and likeness opportunities, importantly. But the NCAA could not easily enforce these for several years. The result was a sense of chaos, instability for schools, confusion for student athletes, and too often litigation. So that's one of the most important things here is the NCAA's ability to enforce these rules. Like, great, we drafted all these rules. They make sense. They clearly take from certain concepts of the professional model. But if the NCAA still can't enforce them, who knows? Seemingly, post-House settlement, they think that they can enforce them, plan on enforcing them. They've set up the College Sports Commission. They're working with Deloitte to set up this NIL Go to review these booster and collective deals from the fair market value perspective. So presumably, they're going to actually have some enforcement power again, which hopefully will make a lot of this more transparent and above board, and hopefully less bag man, as you call it.
That was the direct quote in the reporting, so I want to make sure that's not my word. But as you kind of mentioned, as it's moving forward, I want to make sure we've covered everything with the settlement that you need to.
Let me double check. But Yeah, so just to summarize, schools can pay players directly. Likely the nature of that payment is for team marketing rights. Third-party sponsors can still pay athletes for legitimate, bona fide third-party marketing deals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're affiliated with the school,
that's where it gets
heightened scrutiny. The age of collectives just paying unlimited amounts of money to players, like if this can be enforced, is presumably coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Those deals will now actually have to reflect the fair market name, image, and likeness value of each individual player.
Okay.
That's a huge undertaking, but I think a lot of the money that's been paid wasn't fair market value. I think that's not a big secret.
I mean, we talk about the Nico Iamaleava
mm-hmm.
from Tennessee going to UCLA now,
mm-hmm.
and I think it was $6 million was mm-hmm. what was being talked about, and I don't think he was even going to do a commercial, to be kidding. But it was one of those things where it was like, what is he really going to get besides playing?
Exactly.
From that.
Now, just to play that out, if a booster or affiliated collective is offering to pay a player $6 million,
mm-hmm.
that would trigger this heightened scrutiny. That would go to this process where, like, is this a legitimate endorsement deal, and is this fair market value? So maybe for him it would be, maybe not.
Sure.
But the point is that's going to be scrutinized now, and in the past it really hasn't. There was no enforcement mechanism to actually review those and like do anything about it.
The scrutiny was like public scrutiny, where fans were going, "Well, why is he getting $6 million? And what about this guy?
Yeah.
why isn't he? Why isn't Will Howard winning a national championship anymore,
mm-hmm.
or whatever?" But
but
so moving forward, I wanted to talk about, because as this episode is coming out, the House Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce is going to be meeting and talking about a proposal that would be a kind of a draft of a bill to help codify at a federal level what would change. And so this is the Athletics reporting, and what they mentioned being in it is fully deputizing the Collegiate Sports Commission. They would enforce those rules, kind of everything that you talked about with disclosing third-party deals, prohibiting compensation that's not fair market value,
mm-hmm.
Establish a revenue sharing cap, and so it starts at around $20 million and goes up, I believe, 3% for the next 2 years, and then gets reevaluated after 3. But then I think the pieces that come after it are a little bit more interesting, where it's one is preempting state NIL laws with the national NIL law. It would allow the NCAA conferences or another entity to establish and enforce rules around transfers, eligibility length, and paying recruits, declare college athletes as not employees, and require athlete agents to register with an entity such as the CSC or the NCAA. And my other understanding is that there is some discussion that to go partisan for a second, more Democrat representatives are asking for protections for medical injury, where a player can't just get dropped because they
mm-hmm.
have an injury. You still have to cover, I think, for like 2 years or through their college tenure and things like that. And so that's the thing that I wanted to bring up, is that we've seen states pass a lot of different laws around NIL. I know Ohio has passed plenty. Louisiana just sent one to the governor's desk this week about using tax money to go tax money from sports gambling, I should specifically say, to go towards Division I sport teams and help pay for all of this, mm-hmm. basically, because that's what is going to come out of it. What does that feel like enough from a national legislature to get the NCAA on the right track, or does it need more, whether it be from the national side or from a state side that covers things that aren't included in that?
Yeah. So I think Charlie Baker talked about this as well in the same statement that I quoted, but he said, "We will work with Congress why the settlement is both a massive win for student athletes and a roadmap to legislative reform." Mm-hmm. And I think what they're really talking about is likely an antitrust exemption of some sort, amongst other things. But sports leagues, particularly professional sports leagues, just have an inherent and direct tension with antitrust laws. Like the same thing that like 32 NFL teams entering into contracts to set the guidelines on compensation, set the guidelines on player mobility, et cetera, like in a vacuum that is, subject to antitrust scrutiny. They've structured their league incredibly well and done a lot of things to like preserve their ability to continue to operate. But at the end of the day, antitrust considerations impact every single professional sports league. And I think the NCAAs, as they've kind of, we're not to the professional model, but all of these concepts are not new. We've talked about the NBA. It's like, here's exactly how the NBA does it. And so I think for the NCAA, I think that is probably what they're talking about when they talk about federal legislation. So, and why do they want that? It's so that when someone breaches these rules and they give the school or the player a penalty, they can actually enforce that. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that's really important. While I mentioned NBA, I do think it's interesting that all of these concepts are not new. And my background is more in the professional sports space. So the first time I read the House settlement, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, this is how the NBA does it. This is how Major League Soccer does it. It's like, finally, all these things are coming to college sports. But all these leagues have salary cap circumvention rules as well. And they are very, very similar to what they drafted for these boosters and collectives. For example, the NBA CBA says that teams are expressly prohibited from entering agreements designed to circumvent the intent of the salary cap provision, including setting up contracts where sponsors or business partners pay players compensation that is substantially in excess of their fair market value. Okay. So these aren't new concepts. They're crystallized and enforceable at the professional level, and I think in the coming months and years we're going to see how that plays out in college sports. But understanding the contracts and understanding what each side is agreeing to is going to be very important here. When that student-athlete signs a contract, it might be a 4-year exclusive deal. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. What is your ability to transfer schools? Do you have to pay a financial penalty? What's the school's ability to terminate? What's your ability to terminate? So that's kind of on the player side. And then on the school side, this isn't just about compliance. This is about winning. I mean, I think some of the best professional sports teams use the salary cap to their advantage. Look at the Eagles. Their GM is a lawyer, salary cap nerd that has an army of analytics people and presses every single possible advantage that exists in the salary cap system.
Yes.
So it's, for these schools, it's about compliance, but it's also about creating competitive advantage and winning and setting your team up for success. So I find it all fascinating.
As I see every year on the draft, how he can't keep getting away with it.
Yeah.
But I did want to, I think the one interesting thing too is, as you mentioned, the difference between like the NFL and the NBA. And I think there's a very core difference between college basketball and, say, college football. We'll leave the Olympic sports out of it for a second as well. But the NFL requires 3 years of play in college, whereas the NBA requires 1, basically, from the NCAA, or from playing overseas if that's really the way that they're going to go and things like that. But as we talk about, you mentioned, is a player going to sign a 4-year deal? Are they going to sign a 2-year deal? How are these deals going to be shaped? I look at like a Cooper Flagg with Duke, where he probably signed a 1-year deal knowing that at the end of that season he's going to the NBA. And if things go poorly for him, if he had gotten injured or something and lost all of his draft stock, maybe he stays for a second year and signs another 1-year deal to prepare and things like that. Which I guess in my long run is it's at what point does the NCAA need to almost break off into focusing on each sport versus trying to be a overarching
very good question
type thing?
I think it's hard, especially even with the Olympic sports. It's like this house settlement isn't just football and basketball. All athletes can participate and receive money from the school in exchange for team marketing rights. So I think it's difficult to break it off at this point in time, but we'll see how they plan it out and structure it. But you mentioned the Cooper Flagg and stuff, and I think that's why, just to tie it back to the difference between team marketing rights and athletic services, well, the nature of those payments are different. So that means the nature of those contracts are different, and the ability of schools and players to enforce those contracts is different. So if a player signs a 4-year exclusive marketing deal and leaves after 1 year and breaches that, most likely those damages are going to be financial, and it's going to be likely hard for a school to stop that player from transferring to another school, depending on NCAA rules. Whereas a contract for athletic services, a team is much more likely to get an injunction to prevent that player from changing teams. So all of this kind of ties back to just general corporate law, general state law, contract enforcement, and so that's going to be different for every state. And the drafting and enforcement of these contracts is going to be very important for both the student athlete and the school.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like I said, the House settlement paints this in broad strokes. I probably have 600 what ifs and questions and how will this work, and I think we're going to keep getting information slowly as we go along. But this isn't the last you're going to hear from about all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when it was like 2021 when all this really first kicked off. I feel like 2022. I have been following. I've tried. This is the thing that always fascinates me about sports is that, and especially with college now, is the back door of everything. And so, 3 months ago we were talking about NIL, and it's a totally different conversation than it is now. And I'm sure in another 3 months, especially at the start of football season, we're going to have totally different viewpoints on everything. So
but hopefully this will bring transparency. That's my hope. Like I said, none of this is new. It's just newly applied to college sports. There are ways the NBA enforces these rules and determines fair market value and does all of these things. And I'm really hopeful that NCAA will find a way to make this a operable system. But we'll see.
I think we will, and I'm sure we will be talking with you plenty of times after this, Michael. Thank you again for coming in and talking with me about this today. Is there anything else that you want to add about this settlement or anything with NIL moving forward?
Nope. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to chatting in the future.
Awesome. All right. We'll bring back Jackson. So, Jackson, obviously we're going to be keeping an eye on how things continue to change in this field. And I think we're going to still see more lawsuits in the long run.
Absolutely. Well,
as things get finalized and decided.
Well, we know that Chris Mackey, whenever he came on, he's got a lot of other athletes removed from the class action that he's kind of been working with. I am interested with all these new changes that are going into place, seeing how collectives react to being under the thumb of somebody, because to be perfectly honest, the past couple years, they have just been open bagmen, from the olden days, where it was just hey, here's this check I can give you, and nobody can do anything about it anymore. Kind of removing the whole, Nike to Oregon, almost money laundering aspect of it. I know it's not money laundering, but that's, the term. Where it kind of is okay, no, we need to do this in a real way and hopefully balance out where athletes are going and the talent scale of universities. It's going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
And I really do think it's going to be fascinating to see if we start seeing more things like contracts, whether it be different, where it differentiates between sports and things like that. Like I talked with him about, basketball, a player only needs to spend 1 year in the NCAA before they can go to the NBA, whereas the NFL requires players to spend 3 years.
Right.
And, so, do you start having these high-ranking recruits that come out of high school, sign 3-year deals with Texas, with Ohio State, where they know by the end of their junior year they want to declare? Or are you going to have some kind of clauses built in of, oh, yes, well, they can still leave before their senior year, but it's a 4-year deal, and at this point we just drop whatever percent of the overall payment that's required, things like that.
I'd be interested to see if they do contracts that are you're here for the 4 years, or but you can leave to go to the NFL. Mm-hmm. You can leave if you don't hit a certain amount of playtime percentage. You can leave if you don't hit grade standard, or benchmarks to allow them out, to where it's not just, everybody's at the same school all the time.
I think the only problem with that is the whole fact that they're still not being paid for athletic services.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, it's you can't
incentivize.
say like, oh, this player didn't play for a year, that breaks his contract, because that's not part of the contract at the end of the day. But.
Well, but like more so like gives them eligibility to transfer instead of they're cutting the player loose.
Yes.
Because
you build a trade market.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it in a way it could end up looking more like the MLS, where players are teams make trades for money rather than draft picks, other players, things like that. And so so and so wants to, and it could be good for the smaller schools in the long term. We were kind of discussing a little bit more off mic, and if it's like a small school like I'll just say the MAC.
Yeah.
We'll just say going from like the MAC to the Big Ten, where and especially in football we've seen like Ohio or Miami lose players to bigger schools, and it's like, okay, so if Ohio loses Curtis Rourke to Indiana, and he hasn't, it's not because he's grad transferring and he just wants to go for his junior year or whatever. Does Miami get $1 million from IU to get this player to come and all these numbers are very
like coach buyouts.
Overestimated, but exactly
the same as a coach buyout. It's like, all right, well, if you want this guy, my university has to improve.
Yes,
and I've got to find a replacement. So give me a little cash, you can have him,
and we can get the guy that's gonna be able to fill that hole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to watch unfold, and obviously we're gonna be keeping tabs on it as everything develops, because it's just chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's going to be every season is going to have something new with NIL at this point.
Yeah, for the foreseeable future. I don't think there's a good like cutoff time for that at this rate.
And so I want to thank Michael Goldman again for coming in and sitting down and talking with about that. We will probably be talking with him more in the near future, along with plenty of other legal experts. Because at the end of the day, that is not what we are. We're just sports guys.
If you couldn't figure that out.
But yeah, as always, if you like the show, be sure to subscribe, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching us on YouTube. You can also always find all these episodes on the Fox 19 Now website, fox19.com, and the Fox 19 Sports app. Again, just a reminder that we are the Fox 19 Sports feed. So it's not just 19 on the clock. You're also getting the Gold Standard with Charlie Goldsmith and Joe Daneman each week on Fridays. So be sure to listen to those, and the video versions are always on the website as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that is all we have for this week, and we will see you guys again next time.
Have a goal.